Hello, and welcome to the podcast that discusses all things gaming. Coming to you from the home of Indie PopCon, Gen Con, and the gaming capital of the world, we are the Established Facts.
Hello and welcome to a very special The Established Facts podcast. My name is Derek Newsom-Fry. You guys have not heard from me in quite a bit. However, I have had the opportunity to meet some very interesting people that are behind some of your favorite RPGs. These are independent developers. Anyways, I have one of them on air right now. And if you could please introduce yourself.
Absolutely. My name is Douglas Cole. I run a independent small company called Gaming Ballistic, which is a producer, interestingly enough, of role-playing games, which doesn't surprise anybody, and Viking Shields, which usually does.
That is very unique.
It is. It's just one of those things where one thing sort of leads to another. I started Gaming Ballistic to turn my blog into a company when I realized that I had an idea that I wanted to develop into a role-playing game. And as part of designing the role-playing game, I did some research, and that research involved learning kind of a Viking martial arts, but from a physical archaeology perspective.
Interesting.
Yeah, because and maybe we'll get into this later. I don't want to digress, but it's amazing what happens when you pick up the equipment, not blunt steel, not stuff built for safety, not plastic synthetics, and all of those things have their place. But when you pick up the real weapons and the real equipment and move it through space, all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is different. At least it was for me. Some things are not that different. You can train with a full weight blunted longsword, or grapple with Fiore's techniques, pretty much all out, and get most of the point, so to speak. But there are things that happen when sharp steel edges meet each other or meet your shields, for example, and the shields are proper weight or construction that are different than you'd think. And as part of learning that, I learned how to build some of the equipment. And I realized that there are not a ton of people making authentic Viking shields, even though you've got the History Channel's Vikings and the Last Kingdom and all kinds of shows where it's like raw Vikings. Even the Rohirrim, the Rohan, the Riders of Rohan, were very Vikingish, Norse in how they were made to look in Lord of the Rings, and some of that equipment is on point, and some of it isn't. But in any case, I got to learn how to do that. But the more
I wouldn't imagine there's a whole lot of people making them outside of Norway and possibly Sweden.
Yeah.
Or Iceland, actually.
Iceland,
There's
yes, definitely Iceland.
Huge contingent.
I hope
there.
to go to Midgard in September, the convention. Yeah. I want to. I should have by the time September rolls around, I should have physical and print copies of the PDF and physical book for the Dragon Heresy role-playing game, which is what I'm about to go to Kickstarter on in a couple of weeks. And I really want to sell my Viking book in Viking Land.
That is awesome.
I don't care if I sell more than one book. I just want to do it. To say
you
that
have got to let me know how that goes. So you've teased it a little bit. You are creating. Is this a new system or is it an adventure? What is it?
It is Dragon Heresy is a role-playing game based on SRD 5.1. So it is based on the very excellent 5th edition engine, but with tweaks. And the tweaks, I guess if I have to be brutally honest, the D&D but better is the definition of a fantasy heartbreaker, right? Everyone has their set of house rules that they're absolutely positive if Wizards of the TSR, Coast, Finder, Paizo would have listened to them, then D&D would replace Monday Night Football as the national sport.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, right. Only if they would listen to me and my rule. Well, that's kind of what I'm doing. But some of it was... 5th edition is a great game engine. I like it a lot. I'm a GURPS player, so I go both directions. I'm inclusive. I'm wholly front loaded or roll 1d20 against a target number. I don't care. But I really like the 5th edition engine. It has a lot of roll and shout value. And it's made some really great simplifications in how to do stuff. As an example, the advantage-disadvantage mechanic is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Very simple, very straightforward, condenses all kinds of crazy modifiers into roll 2 dice instead of 1, pick the best or worst. Great game design. Really like it. A lot of other things, feats are optional, which takes some of the system mastery aspects out of it. I don't have to plot out my character for 47 levels in order to have all of these rules, exceptions, become greater than the sum of their parts, and so I roll every die in the world for damage. Every time a die is manufactured, I get to roll that too. And in an exaggerated standpoint, there are games, people accuse Pathfinder of that a little bit. At low levels, all of these games tend to play a bit the same, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. D&D, Pathfinder, whatever, tend to be quick starts. Swords and Wizardry, even faster. Star Wars, West End Games, D6 system. One of my favorite games ever, and I took 15 or 20 players in 1 hour, went from what is this to let's play. Everyone had a character at the end of that hour because the character generation was so intuitive and straightforward. Okay, so what I was doing was I was thinking about D&D 5th edition, and I was thinking about two or three things simultaneously. One was a conversation with Pete Spahn, who wrote White Star and White Box, and a few other people talking about shields. And this is precisely relevant to my lead-in. How really, in D&D, a shield, in old school D&D, a shield is like +1 to armor class. In 5th edition, it's +2. That's a 10% chance delta. It's nothing. A proper made Viking shield is half your height. A medieval heater shield is much smaller. A Roman scutum basically covers you from chin to toes, which would be, it doesn't exist in D&D 5th, but in Pathfinder it's a large shield, and I think it gives you +3 or 4 to armor class. But nonetheless, the amount of area denial in terms of lines of attack and how much of the body it covers is more like a +4 to armor class, or actually more like +10, right? Half your body is covered. So you should be twice as hard to hit, perhaps. Doesn't really work that way, but just roll with it for a sec. But anyway, I was like, shields really ought to be cooler than this. And I started saying, okay, well, I should be able, maybe just this or that or reaction or something. And then I was like, I've never used a shield, right? I've done the equivalent of Steve Rogers picking up the trash can lid before he was Captain America, right? It's, I've got a something shield-ish, shield-like, and I'm going to brandish it. And of course you hold it face on and blah, blah, blah. So I was like, I really ought to learn how to use a shield. if I'm going to write about it. And so I looked around, and as it happened, things came together, and I'd already decided on a Norse-based mythology for the game as I was developing it. I'm like, oh, and I found out this Viking martial arts thing. So I started learning how to use a shield, and I realized that in a lot of these combat styles, sword and buckler, Viking-style martial arts, even when you're dueling with a heater shield, these smaller heater shields, your shield is really your primary weapon. It's not sword, 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 sword. Oh, by the way, here's a block. Sword, sword, sword. Here's a block. It's shield, 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 shield. Opening, kill you.
It's a lot of shoving, isn't it?
It's a lot of there's a lot of shoveling and manipulating, but the thing is in a line of battle, which is not a great representation of a role playing game. Most of it is more like extended dueling or skirmishing. Both because most parties, whether I'm in them or running them, running as the game master, are more like dropping a water balloon into the middle of a herd of kittens than a disciplined fighting force. So you're not going to get the 300 Spartans push spears, right?
No.
You just don't. Oh, look, there's a bad guy. I'm going to run over, and I'm suddenly surrounded. It's a good thing I have a lot of hit points. But it's that kind of thing But as I was learning this, there were all kinds of nuances to how shields were used. They're your primary weapon. They're always forward. You don't throw a sword blow at a shield because the way these shields are constructed, you don't go to Viking Home Depot, pick up some kiln-dried, squared-off S4S lumber that's perfectly dimensioned. You go cut down a damn tree, and you cut it radially with an axe, and you square it off with hand tools. And then you glue it together, and you sand it or shave it off with a scorp or a draw knife. And so it's very manual. I've seen some price lists from history where a shield will cost as much as a sword. And that was news to me. But when I thought about how I learned to make them, it's pretty intense. Anyway, point about the rules is there's very little in most role-playing games that portray the extent to which your shield is primary. Some of that is because, history, when the time that shields were big, you weren't really dealing with steel. You were dealing with bloomery iron. And every now and then in the middle of the battle, you'd have to straighten your sword over your knee. Bronze had some of the same issues because you couldn't really harden it. Now, in the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th century, you did have steel where you would melt it, and the science of it was getting a lot better. But bloomery iron and stuff, you reduce in place. I have a PhD in material science, so if I get a little geeky about that, bring out the hook, reef me back in.
No problem. I'm enjoying hearing this. This is completely news to me that you had this background, so it's actually very interesting.
Anyway, so the point is that I wanted shields to be cooler.
Yeah, because there's only really, if you look at D&D, there's only shield bash. That's the only thing that I can think of.
That's right. You can shield bash. There's the protection fighting style, so you can block for somebody else.
Right.
Stuff like that. So what I wound up doing, and then I have grappling, right? So just compartmentalize shields as, they should be cooler for a sec. Then there was the grappling rules.
I hate grappling.
Everybody hates grappling. That's the thing. And they hate it because either it's an I win button. Oh, you're grappled, you're screwed. Let me cut my own head off so that the monster won't do it for me. Or it invokes a complicated rule set with a flowchart or some craziness that breaks you out of the game. And most people will say that this is because grappling is so technical and so detailed and so different than hand-to-hand fighting that, you just can't possibly do it the same way. Well, I have grappled. I did martial arts that involved grappling for over a decade. And it is all of those things. However, I have also done sword. I have also done sword and shield. I have any fencer or a Western martial artist will tell you And you read the fighting manuals of the period, 1.33 or Talhofer, Sechbuch, Fiore, Meyer, any of these guys. It's amazingly complicated. I mean, and especially when you get into the Renaissance era, people were like George Silver's Masters of Defense. People were like, "Oh, and you need to do the sign of the angle and the twist and the physics and the math because math was beautiful. If you didn't know math, you weren't a real man." And it was the pure science, and fighting was a pure art, and it was very technical. And so you have all of these angles and guards and wards, and it is absolutely 100% as technical and detailed as grappling. Was it the Riddle of Steel? No. Yes, Riddle of Steel. I think that was the one that was written by the longsword guy. But I may be getting that wrong. It's not Burning Wheel. Anyway, but there's a role-playing game out there written by an expert in longsword. And that one is closest to how technical wielding a weapon can be. Maybe too much so, maybe not, but at least he tried. But here's the thing. The key, in my opinion, is keeping the level of abstraction the same.
Right.
If you can abstract all of melee combat and unarmed striking into 1d20 plus a bonus against a target number, roll damage, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do the same thing for grappling. And is all I did, and I do believe that it was unique, is all I did, and I did it first for GURPS Martial Arts Technical Grappling, my first book that I've ever published, that's the first book that was ever published that I wrote. Steve Jackson Games published it for me. But that basically said the same thing. We're going to roll to hit, and then in GURPS you roll defense roll, and then you're going to roll damage, and it is going to be on the same scale as weapon damage. You're going to look up your strength on the damage table, and you're going to roll that. The damage type is control. And the more control you have, the more things you can do.
Oh, okay.
As you build up control, and like if you build up control points, you're like, oh, I'm going to snap his arm because, then what you do is you roll a hit roll, and all of that control that you've built up, because it is literally on the same scale and has gone by the same method as melee attack, you're like, oh, I've built up 12 control points, so I'm going to roll 3d4 or 2d6 or whatever, 1d12, I don't care, but I'm going to roll 12 points worth of damage.
Oh,
and
wow. Okay.
and do that damage because I have that much potential for damage that I've stored up.
That's an interesting way of handling it.
Right. And the way that I did it in GURPS, I would do it a little differently if I had to do it in second edition. But the way that I did it in GURPS is every couple of points lowered your strength. Every 2 control points lowered your strength by 1. And then if you lowered your strength enough, your dexterity would start to go down. It would go down at the same rate if you were strength 10, dex 10. But if you're strength 50 giant with dex of 10, because the dex doesn't. Strength goes as high and as low as you need it to because it's extrinsic.
Okay.
Dexterity is normed on a 3d6 scale. So you could legitimately need, as a Tyrannosaur or something, strength 30 or 40 or 50. You don't need dex 30 or 40 or 50. You need dex 10 if you're going to be an average kind of physical ability. So if you have strength 50 but dex 10, you should have to lose 5 times as much strength before you lose a point of dex as someone who's strength 10, dex 10. Okay.
That makes sense.
Blah, blah, blah math, right? Proportionality, this, that. I would do it differently now because all of that percentages make sense at the table, but it's very fiddly. So what I did in D&D is, with the benefit of hindsight and a lot of play using the GURPS system, is I said, we're going to build up control, and then if you go through certain thresholds, you apply conditions. Conditions are a beautiful freaking thing. They are a checkbox that provides a game mechanical effect, and you either have it or you don't. And that makes it very easy for the poor, benighted game master who is not looking at one character, he's looking at 50 orcs.
Right.
To say, what is going on with this guy? Oh, he's grappled. What does that mean? It means he can't move. This guy's restrained. It means that he's rolling everything at disadvantage and he's at an advantage when you attack him. It's not, I need to do some math and blah, blah, blah. And I could have easily done that in GURPS. I just didn't think of it. I thought of it now.
But those conditions can be easily written on a GM screen
absolutely.
For reference.
Absolutely, and it means the same for everyone. And it's all you have to do is define your thresholds relative to the monster that you're dealing with, and you're good to go. Anyway, so I came up with this grappling system, and the other thing that I realized is when you are doing shield binds and weapon binds and pushing your shield against somebody to open them up for a strike, you are grappling. You're grappling with a weapon, whatever. If you hook their leg, you're pulling. That's all grappling. So a lot of this manipulation that requires skill and finesse, and you can have it a little bit at a time and whatever, all of that can be simulated very, very well with the control point mechanism. So that's sort of the second pillar of what I wanted to do differently. And the third really didn't have much to do with fantasy gaming at all. My blog and my company is called Gaming Ballistic because I sort of made a name for myself in the GURPS community being one of the gun guys. I knew a lot about them. I wrote an article about them. I understood how projectiles work and how they wound and how the guns work, and wrote some stuff about how you can go from real world numbers to GURPS stats and whatever. And the point about that was that I've always been interested in how to model firearms in role-playing games because they're tricky. People only die so much, but you can punch through a lot of steel and still do bad things to the person behind it because of all the energy contained in this tiny little projectile. Hand weapons don't do that, and if you want to start a fight in certain circles, just walk in and say, the other day I was cutting through chainmail with my one-handed sword. And then just step back, point to somebody else like he said it, and then the fight will happen. It's like, it's like ethnic conflict, right? Who let the Irish and the Catholics in the same spot or whatever, right? It gets really violent. When you're talking about, intellectually violent, when you're talking about penetration with hand weapons or bows of armor. And so I was interested in that, but one of the things that came up was because of the hit point model, and this is something fairly unique to hit point ablative systems like D&D. If you have a giant penetrating weapon like a 50 caliber machine gun, 13,000 joules of energy. It's just ridiculous, right? A 9mm pistol is like 550, and a punch is, actually an English longbow with 185-pound draw probably won't get past 150 to 200 joules. So this is literally 2 orders of magnitude more energetic and penetrative than the most powerful longbow ever shot. Not the most powerful crossbows, but those are weird anyway. Point is, you need a different mindset. Because the equivalent of a 20th level barbarian in D&D can basically stand there and take a whole belt of 50 cal and still walk up and kill you. Yes. And I called it the hit point problem because with an ablative system like that, there needed to be something else. And I came up with something else, and that's the third pillar of the modifications, is splitting armor class into a couple of things. Damage reduction, which is already present. You just subtract armor from damage. And instead of the target number being a single number, I divided it in two. Kind of the equivalent of a touch DC and something else. The lower number, what I call the threat DC, if I don't meet the threat DC, I just miss. Oof. If I meet the threat DC, but I don't also exceed this other number called the hit DC, the other person can defend. They can parry, they can dodge, they can get lucky. All of those things get folded into vigor. But if you exceed the hit DC, whatever it is they tried to do didn't work. Your blow was too fast, too skilled, too lucky, and it's going to hit them.
Right.
So that can go right to wounds. And the 20th level barbarian, who's a mighty fighter and he's berserk and he's got the equivalent of 400 hit points, will have 31 wounds. They scale up much more slowly because they're based on your attribute score plus a strength bonus, con score plus the strength bonus. So they scale up much more slowly. So you don't get the, oh, I'm going to sneak attack the sleeping guy. Mm-hmm. Let me hit him 50 times with an axe before he dies.
Now, with the wounds, does he get conditions off of that?
He does. He does. First, as when you first take a wound, first you have to do a morale check. Because ow.
Yeah.
I'm not serious about this. And most PCs have plenty of willpower to stay in the fight. Not all monsters do. Predators in particular will tend to have low morale scores because they're not looking for a fight. They're looking for a meal.
That makes sense.
Right? You don't see... and actually you see a lot of videos like this where you're like these lions. There's a great video recently I saw with lions being chased away by a obviously crippled, like maybe had been hit by a car or something, sheepdog. It was a herding dog that was just barking at these creatures, and these lions are like, "What the heck is this doing? I don't want any part of this. This is not stalk, eat, kill. This is difficult." No. And so predators, they're looking for a meal, not a fight. And so first is a morale check, and then there's an injury check. If you get wounded and you fail your injury check, you have disadvantage on everything, right? You're injured. And then beyond that, there's unconscious and then incapacitated. And there's mortally, you go past a certain point, you're mortally wounded, and if you go past twice that, you're just dead. So there is a threshold that you've taken so much damage that it's just an instant death.
That's really cool.
So those three pillars are the modules that I've added to the otherwise excellent. Actually, it's still excellent, but it's the otherwise really good modular SRD 5.1 engine. And what happened was as I was writing this stuff, I was like, oh, let me write this up, and it'll be 10 or 15,000 words, and I'll publish it on the DMs Guild, and won't that be fun? Right. Open my eyes, get into the D&D market a little bit, rather than just GURPS. And I realized that the problem with this is that having wounds and vigor is really cool, and it does work, and the playtest went well. But you have to convert everything on the fly. We came up with some simple rules. Yeah. But if you say, oh, now I'm going to cast Fireball. Oh, well, Fireball does 66. Well, it does 66 vigor. How many wounds does it do? And so every couple of minutes, let's stop the game and convert. And I'm like, that just sucks. So as I was starting to write this, this was right as the DMs Guild was coming out, because I was just going to do some house rules and write some blog articles and yay. And then the DMs Guild came out, and I had just maybe published Technical Grappling, and so I was in I can write this kind of stuff. And so I was like, oh, well, let me do this. And then maybe a week later, or a couple of days later, or maybe I just heard about it a couple of days later, all of a sudden, like 200,000 words of SRD with a please plagiarize me, go ahead, incorporate this. This is open gaming license with a system reference dictionary. That came out, and I was like, I can do the work for the gamer. I can change all the spells. I can rewrite all the stuff and make it so that you can just play. And that's how Dragon Heresy kind of was born.
Wow.
And then the Viking thing came out of the playtest where I had people just made kind of standard D&D characters with the I didn't even have a name at the time. I actually did have a name at the time. That was the thing. It was the Heretical Game Engine, right? It was the heretical modification. I called it Heretical D&D.
That's where the Heresey came out of.
And so this guy's like, "Oh, I want to play a cleric. What cleric should I play?" I'm like, what pantheon? I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. Let's do Marvel superheroes. Let's do the Asgardians," because I had just seen Thor the day before. And so, okay, yay, God of Thunder, great. You got Call Lightning. Thor, being a cleric of Thor is like totally old school, right? I mean, It's been around for 30 years.
Yeah.
You've got the Hammer of Throwing and the Hammer of Thunderbolts and all kinds of stuff. You've got Mjolnir clones that have been kicking around in magic item lists for, I think, almost ever since D&D existed. You can find those. So there was that. And then I was like, okay, well, I want to have these elements. I want dragons, and I want there to have been a dragon empire, and I want old school fairies who were evil and nasty, more like the Dresden Files Fae.
Oh yeah.
Not the tra-la-la elves and aren't we just damn better than you from the Tolkien books.
Right. Right.
I wanted Fae that you should be afraid of, that if you didn't go out to get your water, prick your finger and leave some blood on the stones, you might find a dead cow in your well the next day.
So you went to real world mythology.
I did. And so I wanted, the dragons, I wanted that. And then with the Norse in there, I was like, okay, this is a great mix. I was going to actually, I had Lovecraftian stuff in there too for a while. And it was a real kitchen sink sort of thing. But then as I started to do some research into both the sagas and the mythology, I realized that almost everything that I had posed could easily be reflected in the Norse myths themselves. There are lots of great dragons and worms and ormer in Norse mythology. They're already there. The white. This is really cool. I had no idea until I started learning a little bit of the language. The word white and wraith come from Old Norse, or at least they look. I think they do, because there's a creature called a Vater, Vaettr. It means a spirit. Mm-hmm. White Vater. It's the same creature. Mm-hmm. A wraith comes from Wraither. Wraither, wrath. It literally is the word for wrath or anger. And so you have all of these tie-ins that are already there. And so at some point I said, not everything has to be Lovecraftian. So I took the outsiders out. And not everything has to be Tolkien. So halflings went away. But I came up with a reason for, I deliberate, and my dwarves are not short-bearded Scotsmen. They are a creation of the Aesir, but they're different. They look like granite countertops. They're not flat, but they look like rock. But they do not sparkle and will fight anyone who says different. Sorry, it was a little bit of Ken Hite was my editor for a while before he got drowned under 5th edition.
Yeah.
He loved that line because it was sort of a smack at Twilight.
Oh yes, those aren't vampires.
Right. So I was like, yeah, they my dwarves don't sparkle and they'll fight anyone who says different. But in any case, I wanted them a little bit different. And so there was a culture, they actually brought the Norse culture to the humans for reasons. Blah, 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 world building. I don't want to get into it. Well, I could get into it, but we don't need to. The point is that there was such a deep well from which to draw that I could cut a lot of the complexity from the setting and just have kind of a Norse-based main realm and a region north of that realm that used to have a mighty empire, and now the king of this one realm, Torungar, says anyone who can hold territory in this formerly forbidden realm, if you can pay the king's gift, your duty, your royal duty, will make you a noble. And the country, the realm, had been static from a nobility standpoint. You had certain houses and that was it. So there was no good way to have upward mobility, which is very not Viking, by the way. They not only did they have a very flat very egalitarian, relatively speaking, for the time, society. Iceland was formed by a bunch of guys who got kicked out of Norway, as far as I can tell, because they were like, they were sort of like the Americans of Norway. Like, no, we're going to be all equal, and I don't want to do this rank or fealty thing, so we're going to go to Iceland and do our own thing. That's probably a gross simplification, and I've just raped their history. But you sort of get this feeling that a couple of things is, the first is that there's a lot there, and there's a lot of depth to the mythology and the culture, that means you don't need to embellish. It's already provided for you. Number two is, as much as people say, oh my goodness, D&D characters, murder hobos,
Right.
No one's like that.
No.
The Vikings were. They were absolutely that. Your renown, your ability to be awesome was based on your willingness to be good at combat. You were not allowed to be more than a couple steps from your weapons. They probably slept in their armor. There's a debate that happened over and over again, right? But Odin says in the Havamal, never be more than a step from your spear. Well, that sounds like every D&D character I've ever heard of.
Yeah, no doubt.
Right?
Well,
and how do you be an awesome Viking? You go to foreign places and you kill them and you take their stuff. That's like every old school campaign ever.
As long as the campaign includes characters that slip on banana peels and stab themselves.
And cross-dress.
Yes.
And have sex with horses.
Exactly. Right? Well, actually, that actually happens in the Havamal too. So.
No, that's what I mean. That Loki decides to be. Not only does he change into a horse, he changes into a mare and births Sleipnir.
Yeah, I totally did not think about this as much as I've studied Norse mythology. I did not realize it was a D&D campaign. Oh my goodness, it is.
It really is, right? It really is. I mean, so how does Thor beat the giants? He cross-dresses.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it is crazy to, and even though in the time it was denigrated as unmanly and all that stuff, it happened. Mm-hmm. And you didn't have to necessarily beat the bejesus out of someone to win. You could indulge in a contest of fleeting.
Yes.
An insult contest. Mm-hmm. It's a bard. It's rapier wit.
Uh-huh.
And of course, in the bards were a big deal. They were skalds. And if you could get the skalds to tell your story, you were the man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I mean, and it was really cool. Obviously, polio and disease and all that stuff. But I mean, relatively speaking, in terms of trying to file off some of the rough edges, if you want to, or you cannot, right? I mean, it is 1000 AD. There are certain things that you just don't do then. But it's a very malleable, flexible, friendly, old school setting that if you want to be inspired for a campaign, you can pick up history, you can pick up the sagas, which are kind of sort of history, or you can pick up the Eddas, the poetic and the prose Eddas, where they tell the stories of the magic and the gods and whatever, and you can just absolutely steal great stories, file off the edges just a tiny bit,
absolutely,
and have a great time. Anyway, so for the last 2 years, I've been trying to bring this game to reality. It's been in full manuscript form for the better part of a year, but about a year ago I realized in order to do it the way that I wanted to do it, I'd need $150,000 that I just don't have.
What? It's in your couch cushions.
I know, and that's why I started the Shield business. But more seriously, anyway, so I had 3 books laid out. The Heroes book was all character generation. The Deeds book had all kinds of stuff about playing the game and magic items and new rewards and treasure and all kinds of stuff went into the Deeds book. And then all the world building and the 9 realms. And I've had to shift around the 9 realms a little bit to account for my own mythology. Jotunheim is the home of the giants, but that's a metaphor. That was actually the home of the dragons because people say, oh, look at these giant creatures. They're giants. They're giants.
Okay.
Muspelheim, the Plane of Fire, is the home of the fiends and the devils and the fiends, right? The devils and the demons and those guys.
Wow.
Alfheim, pretty easy.
Yeah.
That's where the Winterfey live, the Fey. The Svartalfheim, the home of the Dark Elves, is actually the sub-dimension, the Shadow Realm. When they create fairy realms, they create them in Svartalfheim.
Okay.
So it's this pocket dimension. It's kind of a combination of an ethereal and astral kind of plane. Then you have Niflheim, the home of Helheim, of course. Got to have a place for the dead to go. Niflheim, plane of ice, became my elemental plane. Mm-hmm. The ices just happened to be what they saw the first time. Obviously Midgard. I feel like I'm missing one. Oh, Vanaheim. What did I stick? I think I called Vanaheim the plane of magic and the spirits. So that's kind of like the druids, which I've renamed Trevenor, which means tree friend.
Oh, wow.
So it was fun. It's been fun, but it's ready. It's finally ready. What I wound up doing was I said I can't afford. I was sinking money into it left and right, and that was fine. But I was like, I can't really afford to do it all like I wanted to. So I thought about it real hard. I'm like, I had this whole world that I've built west of Torrengar. Forget it. No one cares. So all these other places are reserved for later, and that let me cut things out. And I was like, well, I'm asking people to swallow a lot with all of this different stuff. So let's restrict it. We'll do fighter, berserker, cleric, and wizard, level 1 through 5. So it's an intro set. It is designed to be an introductory set, to get you the combat rules, get you the wounds and vigor, get you the threat DC, hit DC, get you the basic concepts, and hopefully it will do well enough that at a later date I can either release in whole or in part a deluxe set that has everything, with whatever improvements that people who actually play the game will bring too.
So what are you looking to? What's your goal? Monetary
in terms of dollars?
Yes.
Okay. The funding goal is about $3,500 to start, and that's kind of the level where I can write checks for the rest if I just barely make it. But if I get as many backers as I got for Lost Hall of Tyr, my adventure that I wrote that was kind of the one-shot dungeon grappling demonstrator, which is about 250. If I get 250 backers and my mix is about the same, half PDF, half print plus PDF, that's going to be $7,000 or $8,000. That's more than enough to finish the book.
Okay, and what are some of the rewards here? So you've mentioned PDF plus print. Do you have anything else? Like, can someone get a shield?
Yes, actually, as a matter of fact, they can. And the funny thing is that the way that it kind of works at that level is if you pledge for the shield, you get the game free. Not only do you get the game free, but I will have a color POD interior specially printed for you at that level.
That's awesome.
It's the only level that comes with that from the start. But for $500, then that's what you deserve. These shields are if you look around online, you'll find these 28-inch planked shields with bad handles, and they're too heavy for what they are. So I really would put my shield up against those, and those are $450 to $600.
Wow.
So that's the value. I mean, these hand, and I make them by hand. I hand carve the handles and stuff like that. So it's I feel good about that price point.
That's super unique. I don't like that. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I'm going to have them painted with a crest that I'm developing that's based on the symbology in the cover of the book. There's a sort of a triangular thing that looks like the Volknot Odin symbol, Odin's triangles, with some gems that represent the houses that formed the nation of Torrengar. So they'll be painted. But if someone wants to say, "Hey, I want you to paint mine like this," as long as it's basically simple. I'm not an artist.
Right.
As long as it's something that I can do with a sort of a stencil, I'll probably allow it. I don't expect. The only thing that would be different is if like all of a sudden I got and I'm going to limit it to 70. Right. I think that in the time period I can I've gotten good at this, and there are ways to batch things. It's all still manual,
Right.
but first you glue all the boards, and then you cut all the circles, and then right. So, without getting into it, I'm fairly sure that I could produce easily 12 to 20 shields a week for the rest of time. So I could, in the 10 or 12 weeks that would be between the Kickstarter closing and when I will promise to send out PDFs, although that's sort of a misleading promise because the game is almost done.
Right, and
right.
I've been privileged because you and I have talked, and so I've seen little bits and pieces that you've shown me, and it actually looks really good. I'm excited for it to be published. Now, when is the Kickstarter running?
I hope to launch April 2nd. April 1st would be a little bit on the nose, so I hope to launch. I think it's Tuesday, April 2nd, and it'll run. I think I want it to end. It's like the 28th of April. It's not going to run quite the full 30 days, but if you've ever done a Kickstarter, there's those 2 weeks in the middle are nothing clawing your eyes out anyway. No So I'm going to run it through April, basically. And I really shouldn't say this out loud, but I'm going to anyway. You've seen it, right? You've seen the fact that you've seen 150 pages of this needs to be tweaked. It has been edited a little bit by Ken, a lot by me. Uh-huh. It will go out to a professional editor who's promised a 4 to 6 week turnaround. If I fund on the first couple of days, which really hopefully it shouldn't be that much of a problem. But if I fund the first couple of days, I will simply write him a check and say go. And so by the time the Kickstarter finishes, we will be remerging the final manuscript with the layout, tweaking things as necessary. And I would expect that by the time the money clears, I will be very close. Well, let's just say this way. The day the Kickstarter ends and the money clears, I will be sending the backers something.
That's cool.
So, and I can make that promise because I could do it tomorrow if I wanted. All right, not tomorrow. I could do it Monday because the monsters are still being edited, laid out. Michael Clark he's my guy who does some of my covers, and he's brilliant, and he's found a great way to do a merge from a spreadsheet.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, so he created a template, and then he just says go, and all of a sudden, boom, 100 monsters are laid out.
Okay. So,
yeah, some things in Photoshop and in InDesign are simply black magic, and I just make really the sacrifice of Kentucky Fried Chicken and bow to those gods and move on. I am learning, though. It is a learnable program.
It is.
But that was really... Yeah, that was really cool, though. And the thing is, so I expect that to wind up being about 100 pages of monsters, roughly one per page. You're going to have a bunch of text, and each monster has a description of the monster, the habitat that they live in, and their behavior.
That's awesome.
And the monsters that you expect to kill in order to eat, bears, deer, whatever, have body weights, because there's a section in the rules about dressing game. Wow. I've enhanced a little bit of the man versus nature aspect.
That's cool.
In the rules. If you know who David Pulver is, he's written a bunch for GURPS. He's also done Big Eyes, Small Mouth, and a bunch of other things. He really was like, hey, I don't remember this from D&D. I'm like, yeah, those are original. He goes, those are really cool. Anyway, it's that's fun because it really means that you can make a role-playing game out of the travel bit. Oh, we're going to hunt. We got this much meat. Why do you have a ranger with him? Yeah, it's all, yes, he's a 2-weapon fighter or whatever. But one of the reasons why you have a ranger is they will maximize the yield of game. They've got the right skills. So, they can get half the live weight in edible stuff out of a critter.
There is a subset of gamer that likes that whole survival aspect. Going from a video game aspect, there's a survivalist type of game.
Oregon Trail.
Or
you have died of dysentery.
Yeah, and that is super popular, even though you always die.
Right.
Or like the Fallout series where you have a survival aspect. So,
Yeah, exactly. Now, it's not required. That's one of the great things about 5th edition in general. Nothing is required. If you wanted to say, and you travel for a month and you're there,
you can totally do it.
you can totally do it, and the game supports it.
Yeah.
Actually, my friend Peter Del Orto, frequent collaborator in the Steve Jackson Games world, and occasionally, and he actually helped me write the basis of the original Dungeon Grappling rules. We did a 1,500-word article for Tim Shorts' Manor magazine on grappling and swords and wizardry. Because if you can do it in swords and wizardry with such a limited stat block and limited system, you can do it in anything. And Peter actually has something in his Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game campaigns that he likes to, I think he actually calls it the Wandering Damage Table, instead of a Wandering Monster Table, whereas you do this, you hand-wave the journey because no one wants to slog through it, but everyone rolls like a survival skill or a health roll or both or something, and then you take some effects. So maybe you show up to the dungeon and you're limping, or you've taken a wound, or you've caught some sort of disease. I kept wanting to say a syphilis, but God, I hope not.
No, I hope not either. But
yeah, I was totally blanking on the on my
it's like
nasty diseases that you can pick up.
Something filth fever. Filth fever is one of them.
Yeah, exactly, filth fever. Right. So you pick up. I was trying to, and this is going to bug me for the rest of the thing, so I got to just let it go. But yeah, you pick up dysentery. That was the word that I'm looking for. But yeah, so you pick up a disease or something because you didn't cure your game right, or you're limping because you stubbed your toe, or you had a nasty spider bite and it's itching and it's distracting. So like he'll have everyone roll, and then some people will be a little bit inconvenienced, and it just adds to the role playing fun. And it basically means that as long as you're well provisioned, you still might not get through all unless you're lucky, and that's at the least end of. Okay, you've just traveled 500 or 1,000 miles. At the least end of it, that's a decent way to go. And then there's okay, we're going to do this, a day at a time. What happened today? What happened today? What happened today? And that gets into Robert Jordan levels of pain.
Mm-hmm.
And Rand picked up his left foot, and then he put it down. And Rand picked up his right foot, and then he put it down.
It can get
and Rand picked up his left foot, and Perrin would have been able to get all the girls because Perrin was so popular, and Matt would have told the joke, and then he put his foot down. Let's lather repents for 600 pages. Now, I read all the books, which is why I poke fun. But it did get into the, okay, and we're actually going to role play out every day of this journey. It's like, wow, okay.
Dang.
You go, man.
Yeah, no doubt. Have fun with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a whole section that we have not gotten.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm perfectly willing to shut up and change bases here.
No, you're fine. But typically our episodes are about an hour, and we're actually heading to that hour.
Yeah.
Are you cool with staying a little bit to talk about
totally.
that section? Okay.
Yeah, no, my kids are in bed, and I'm all I need is one more glass of wine, and I'll be really fun.
Oh, wow. Great. Okay, well, welcome to the Established Facts After Dark. This may actually get broken up into two episodes, but, I mean, I really want your input into this other section here, which is independent game development.
Yeah.
It's something that I've been involved in for several years. You've apparently been involved with it for a long, long time. Why do it?
And that's an excellent question. And there's why do it for fun, and there's why try and do it for money.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
and
yes.
They're
yes.
different. They're very different. Yes. I started writing gaming stuff. First, I was a contributor on GURPSnet, and that was when the internet was just becoming the internet, right? When I was in college and grad school, that's when that happened. And I'm 46 years old, and so when in 1989 to 93, we first got email addresses.
Oh yeah.
And then when I was in grad school, every now and then you had to purge the lab computers because someone had downloaded a whole hard drive worth of porn, because you could start to do that.
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, right? So it was the thing, and you start to have this interaction with other gamers that you used to have to do through Dragon Magazine or through a letter writing campaign.
Oh yeah.
Right. So and the Daily Illuminator started, and from Steve Action Games, started as the Illuminator bulletin board service. It was dial-up, which technically makes it the longest running blog in the history of blogs. It was a blog before blogs existed. Every day it would update something, and it has done so for decades. Interesting little factoid. But the point is that you start to interact. And, oh, look, I'm going to use the GURPS vehicle systems instead of to make a car. I'm going to make a freaking aircraft carrier, or I'm going to tweak it out to see if I can design the F-35 or the V-22, or I'm going to use GURPS robots to design the standard SM-2 extended range missile because it's a better way of doing it than blah, blah, blah. And you throw that stuff out there and you get feedback and you talk to people and become friends with people, or at least friendly acquaintances with people who you never would have met otherwise. And it's gratifying and it's fun. And it gives you a chance to scratch the itch of the gaming, because at least at that time, this was still when it's like it wasn't really satanic panic stuff, but the gamers are weird.
Well, during that time especially, yes.
Right. And you didn't have billion-dollar superhero and fantasy franchises that just continue to churn out money, right? Being Legolas or being Tony Stark. Who's Tony Stark? Yeah, nobody knew. Yeah, you knew Spider-Man, but only because he was on the freaking electric company.
And
right?
Yeah, it just was
the pop
not
culture,
a thing until the 2000s.
It was not a thing, and we can just leave it at that. It really wasn't a thing. Yeah. I'm sure that there are people who can draw that and argue with it, but I think, to most people' perspective, gaming was still that odd thing. You didn't have what was the number that Wizards threw out? 6 million people or something playing D&D.
Yeah,
in the last year. You don't have it where the fourth year of 5th edition's release is stronger sales than the first, which breaks every law of game release today, but we'll get to that later. But so you get into this, and then at some point, you have these magazines. Dragon Magazine came and went, and at least for me, I got into GURPS for whatever reason. I was introduced to it my last year in high school, and started really getting into it. And I would spend my meager funds in college to get the latest source book when I could, ran some campaigns, and just I got into it. And the people at Steve Jackson Games, by and large, always been pretty cool and pretty accommodating. And so eventually, I was like, I want to write something, and they're like, well, if you want to write for us, start with Pyramid Magazine, because if you can't write 3,000 words for Pyramid, you can't write 30,000 for a book or 125,000 for a source book. Because remember, this was the heyday of RPG publishing in the 90s,
right?
Where you could publish 128-page source book after 128-page source book after hardback in multiple editions, and expect to print 5,000 and 10,000 copies of these things and sell them. And so if you wanted to do that, you just
went up and asked, "Hey, can I do this?"
Well, yeah. Well, they have submission guidelines. Well, yes. I mean, what they would say is people would send them because they were driven by the fan base. They had some staff writers, but they've always been a work for hire kind of place. They have official submission guidelines, and you'd see, who's this guy? Who's this Bill Stoddard guy? Who's this Ken Hite guy? Who's this, they're all downstairs. Who's this David Pulver guy? Well, they decided to write for them, and they've built up a rep, and then they write for them, and they get published. And I was like, why can't I do that? I have something to say. So I decided to play to my strengths, and I wrote an article about firearms. Interior and terminal ballistics for GURPS. Got me into TV tropes because of its mathiness. So I wrote this, and then I wrote a little one on Frag, and then I just sort of kept going, and all of a sudden I've got 12 or 13 articles. Some of them are the cover articles and whatever, and that's over a period of 10 years or something. And then I came up with this grappling idea. Hey, I think we should do this. And one of the comments that Sean Punch, who's been very complimentary about the entire thing, he's like, the only thing that I regret about technical grappling is we didn't think of the concept when we were inventing GURPS 4th edition, because it beautifully solves some of the problems that have come up. And I don't want to talk about so much about that, is that after I wrote a bunch of articles, I made a proposal to do the grappling book, and it was accepted.
So, I mean, you got into this pretty much at the ground floor. I mean, that was 90s. Am I correct on that?
Well, my very first Pyramid article was 2002.
2002. That was still actually pretty much earlier in this whole revolution of becoming popular, gaming becoming popular. If you are someone who is just thinking, hey, I've got this idea and I want to do it to make money, you're never going to replace your day job. But
depends what your day job is, I suppose.
Excuse me?
It depends what your day job is, I suppose.
Well, that's okay, truth.
Right.
But let's say that you want to make a little money on this, and
absolutely, yep.
Is there room to do that?
There is, but it depends what you want out of it. Pyramid Magazine pays 4 cents a word. Mm-hmm. If you write a 10,000 word article, you're going to get 4 cents a word on that. It was what, $400, right? Yeah. So, and most Pyramid articles are not 10,000 words. They're more like, actually the hot spot for Pyramid articles is 2 to 4 pages, 1,700 to 3,400 words. So, that's the kind of thing that you can do, and you can write an article, you can churn it out. You only get paid when they get published. And there's only one Pyramid per month. But there are other venues to do that. And getting started with a magazine is nice because it's short, it's topical, and if the magazine editor is worth their salt, if you have a good idea, they will send you back a manuscript that is probably brutalized.
Oh yeah.
And as you learn painfully that how you write for games and how you write office memos or how you write emails LOLZ is radically different.
Oh yeah.
Now, I may be patting we're stroking our own backs here, and we have a mutual admiration society, but right. I would say that role-playing game rules writing is some of the more difficult writing out there. And remember, I've written for physical review letters, right? I've written a PhD thesis. I've written more office emails than I want to think about, right? A lot of people have done a lot of writing, some of it for publication, some of it in very technical subjects. Role-playing game writing is hard because it has to have all of the imagination of good prose fiction. It has to have all of the grammar of journalism, all of the clarity of technical writing, and all of the consistency, the rules consistency of a mathematical treatise. It's really hard to do all that. And you can see it. You can see people who are good rules writers, but they cannot spell. You can see people who are, who are good prose writers. They have good imagination, but it's all passive voice and it's all conditional and it's all wishy-washy. And my God, claw my eyes out, right? So you have all of these skills that you can only develop by writing stuff down, getting it out there, and taking your lumps.
Oh yes.
Right. And getting people who are unafraid to say, wow, dude.
That sucks.
you just, but you also need people who are going to say, here's the good part. This is the core of what's worth saving. Ditch the rest, fix this. And you have to be able to say, okay, I have a 410,000 word 3-volume manuscript, and I'm going to publish 155,000 of it. And the rest either is not needed or can wait.
And you have to be willing to let go of your baby. You
do, and that's right. You absolutely do, and you have to realize that. pick your audience and all that good stuff. But nonetheless, if you want to do it for money, you start off, I think, writing magazines, writing for magazines or whatever. You need to get into a circle where you can get taught how to do it.
Well, you also have to, I hate to say this, but it's similar. I'm in a technical field, but it's networking. Really.
You do. I think that it is with Google Plus and less so with Facebook. Facebook can be very difficult.
Well, it's sort of kind of like you're throwing a piece of paper into the windstorm, because it
can be. It can also be more like throwing blood in the water. People love to hide behind anonymity and tear other people down. I found Google Plus is a lot less bad for that. So there is, but you can find a circle of tough but fair-minded people who will get together and help you learn to write. Christopher Rice, who has now been in the third volume of Pyramid, he's a friend of mine. He game masters my GURPS game, but we've been collaborating and stuff for a long time. He's actually been in more than 50% of the Volume 3 Pyramid articles. He is a prolific writer. But he and I started for a while a writers club, the Pyramid Write Club. First rule of Write Club is we do not talk about Write Club. But we did it to help people learn to do the GURPS Steve Jackson game style. And eventually that resulted in over 100,000 words being submitted to Steven through that channel. We both ran out of time, unfortunately, but there are things like that. And you can always, you and I are going to be talking for going on 2 hours by the time we get done with this, because we love talking about gaming.
Yes.
And what a new person to the field has to realize is, I will happily talk to random stranger about gaming, because it's one of the reasons why I stay up until 2 o'clock in the morning when I really ought to be sleeping.
Yes.
It's the thing that I want to do.
It's a thing that when I'm done with work and I do have a cognitive level of work, I still want to come home and I want to work on cognitive stuff like
That's
gaming.
Right.
Please visit us at www.theestablishedfacts.com and our Facebook page, facebook.com/theestablishedfacts. If you would like to support us by buying some merchandise, visit cafepress.com/castingrobot.
Bonus